Good morning, friends. Is the mic picking me up okay? Do this. I get to do this, don't I? Cool. Looks less weird on the film. I'm Val Liveoak, Friends Meeting of San Antonio. And today we're going to have a panel about support and meeting involvement in the work of activism in our work for justice. And each of us will introduce ourselves, and then we'll talk briefly about some of the support we have received, support we wished for that maybe wasn't forthcoming, or other ideas of support. And then we'd like to invite, I think, any of you who have done activism work and would like to reflect on it in regard to support and involvement of the meeting in it, you know, to briefly perhaps do that. So does that make sense? What I can't see Jerry if he's nodding. I hope he is. Yes. And
yes.
Yeah, so that's what I hope we're going to do. And so I think I'll pass it first to Liz to introduce herself and talk a little bit about her experience and her many years of activism.
Because of the ways the mics arranged, I'll stand here. My name is, good morning, my name is Liz Wolfe. I'm with the Dallas Friends Meeting. I've spent 40 years doing community organizing as my profession, which is a lot of door knocking, a lot of hard stories, a lot of wins, a lot of losses. It's you know, you feel like you're making forward steps, like in lending to Black and Latino communities, and then the subprime crisis hits and you take some back. You know, it's been like that the whole time. I appreciated Val asking this question. For the most part, for me, I did not bring very much of my activism. It's not that I hid it, but I didn't bring it and try to move my local meeting because it's what I did 6 days a week. And for me, it was more supportive to come to the meeting and have a sanctuary and quiet time and a time to reflect and not try to do the work that I did the other 6 days of the week in the meeting. And for me, that was super important. And this notion of that of God in every person and how do I take that into my organizing work was very, very also important. I did realize when I was thinking about this, though, I had a conversation with the Quakers in Phoenix where I first started going to meeting a long time ago, because I had conflict inside of myself because we did direct action, right? Can you show up with enough people to get the person that you're asking to do something to do it? And for me, that felt, and then I would read things in Quaker journals or Friends Journal where people would go and speak of, you know, try to speak truth to power. And I'm like, well, that doesn't work. I mean, I was in my 20s, you know, I was not that, you know, all these notions, it doesn't work, it does work, it should work. Why that's, okay, thank you. All those things were in big conflict in my mind because I wanted to believe there was that of God in every person and that I could reach it. And I'd seen what direct action could do. And I don't like conflict. So I did have a very useful conversations with some Quakers in that meeting about how the direct action allows people to do the right thing. And that was super useful. But after that, I wasn't trying to move my meetings, but I did need the meeting as a home, as a place to be rejuvenated, to be able to go back out in the world and continue the fight. I also was going to mention, it's not my story, but we did have a person in our meeting that was working with what's now called Faith in Texas, or it's another kind of organizing group. And he also made that same choice. He could have asked our meeting to join Faith in Texas, which is a congregational based organizing operation. And he decided not to, because again, he was like, I don't want to come to a meeting and have it be work. So I think there's a lot of ways that folks, we can support each other. And for me, that has been the thing that has been most supportive. And coming here, even just to hear other people's activism also feels supportive. It's a place for me to sink and to get rejuvenated. Thank you.
Jerry, you want to introduce yourself, and then Liz can read your traveling minute. She has it on her phone.
Okay, let me let's see. Good morning to you guys. It's afternoon here, but I'm Jerry Knutson from Orlando meeting.
Let me get to the mic to read this minute.
Closer to.
Yeah. Dear friends, let me take off the mask. Dear friends, greetings from Orlando, Florida, monthly meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. We ask you that you welcome and care for our member, Jerry Knutson, as he travels in the ministry with a concern for teaching about spirituality, discernment, Quakerism, and teaching, and techniques for Bible study. Since April 2015, Orlando meeting has taken his ministry under our care. Jerry Knutson is a snowbird and has dual memberships in Quakers in Orlando, Florida, and Morgantown, West Virginia. He began worshiping with Quakers in the mid-1980s. He was a residential student at Pendle Hill in 2002 and 2003. He was a released friend from Pittsburgh monthly meeting from 2005 to 2014. He received a Master's of Divinity degree from Earlham School of Religion in May of 2014 with an emphasis in Christian spirituality. In 2017, Pendle Hill published his pamphlet, number 443, Individual Spiritual Discernment, Receiving, Testing, Implementing Leadings from a Higher Power. His pamphlet sold out in 14 months, making it Pendle Hill's best-selling pamphlet. He was fascinated, taught, he has facilitated, taught workshops in 25 states, Washington, D.C., Bethlehem, Palestine, and Nakuru, Kenya. Nakuru, I've got that right? I hope I have. He has traveled with FWCC Traveling Ministry Corps. Jerry's ministry, grounded in his education and experience with Quakers, has enriched our meeting, and we trust it will enrich your gathering. In the light, Greg Allen Anderson, clerk of Orlando Friends meeting, approved and endorsed and supported by Southeastern Yearly Meeting, William Carley, clerk.
So I wanted to have the traveling minute read for two reasons. One is that it is a means of support, and also it introduces me. And you can see that Southeastern Yearly Meeting endorsed it because I go outside the boundaries of Southeastern Yearly Meeting and give workshops all over the place. So I've asked them, and they don't just endorse it, they approve it, which you do in a business meeting, and they are providing support. Now, they just signed this yesterday, so actually, yeah, it's effective today. April 16th was the first date of it being effective, and it runs until March 2024. So if your yearly meeting is looking at supporting ministers, you can look at the Southeastern Yearly Meeting to get a place to start at their Faith and Practice. Provides my financial support. And frankly, I had, when I was at ESR, Earlham School of Religion, yeah, let me know if you're not hearing me. I just had a sign come up saying my internet is unstable. Okay, so at ESR, I was in supervised ministry and traveled in the ministry to give workshops and found it was very expensive. And I realized that I could not travel in the ministry and retire, and I was not willing to spend my retirement funds. So being a member of Orlando, they have financial assets. And so I asked them, I said, you know, the only reason I don't travel in the ministry is that funds are an issue and I don't want to spend my retirement. And they said, well, let's give you a clearness committee. And so I had a clearness committee looking at both my involvement, you know, is the Spirit leading me right? And is the meeting being led right? And then the meeting approved me as a traveling minister. So that's one way of support I've received. I've also been a released friend. Released friend releases you from the obligation of membership. And that is, it's a mixed bag. I have not asked to be a released friend because I want to be active in the life of the meeting. So that's why I'm a traveling minister now and not a released friend. Other ways of support is I have an anchor committee in my monthly meeting, which actually it was most convenient to add it because I'm on worship and ministry as the worship and ministry committee as my anchor committee, because we only need to meet a few times a year and we could just put it on the agenda. But an anchor committee provides three things: accountability, support, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's exactly how you raise kids, isn't it? And then finally, they help me with clearness. So they can kind of be a mini clearness committee if I need clearness on whether I should travel somewhere or if issues come up. Okay, well, I think that's what I've got for how I've received support. Thank you.
So I'm Val Liveoak, and now a member of the Friends Meeting of San Antonio. But in the 80s, when I first, I don't know if I can do this. Oh, okay, that'll help. Okay. And I'll talk as loud as I can. I'm trying to reduce the feedback. Okay, so in the 80s, and those of you, some of you have known me all this time and know this, and some of you may not. In the 80s, I felt a leading to work in El Salvador. And at that time, I was an active RN, and so I didn't know what I could do to help with the war as it was going on in El Salvador. But I felt a leading to go. At the same time, I had been attending Friends Meeting of Boston for 3 years. I felt a leading. Oh, thank you. So I don't have to worry about this guy. Thank you. A leading to join the meeting. So I don't recall whether I had 2 clearness committees or 1, but I had a sense of support in both of those processes, and almost accidentally brought the question to the very first yearly meeting I attended when another friend that I didn't know was asking for support to do essentially what I was going to do, the same kind of work with the same organization that I knew nothing about that until she spoke up. And so I sort of tried to get Me Too into whatever was going on. And so the yearly meeting's response was also quite interesting, because the yearly meeting didn't say yes right away, which I thought, oh, well, they don't know me, maybe they know her, all that. But they came back the next day and they said, our yes is that, yes, we want to sign on as your sponsor, but we also want to know how to really serve you. So it was a yes and instead of a yes but kind of response that I really appreciated. Anyway, that service was mainly focused, the service part was mainly focused in the organization I was working with and the organizations I was working with in El Salvador. But the support I received from what I perceived as an ad hoc committee, but I know at least one person here, Terry English, was very active in that. And so it may have actually been a regular committee, I don't know, that they did all sorts of stuff for me. They served as a fiscal sponsor, which means they took in donations to cover the cost of the work. And also I had an obligation of health insurance for my son in the US during part of that time. So I was paying health insurance for him. They also, when we could send letters, remember those? Back and forth, they would type them up and make a newsletter for me. And I think eventually it had several hundred people, the newsletter that I sent out. And that was hugely valuable. I wrote it, but I couldn't have done those logistical type things and other logistical type things. And I don't know how much I was being actively held in the light in a deep spiritual way, but I was very clear I was being held in the light in terms of the material help I needed. And to the degree that when I'd return to the US and do fundraising, they'd help set up the fundraising trips. Most of them I'd have stay in somebody's house. I mean, all of that was very much taking care of me. So without ever using the term released friend, I was essentially a released friend. And that's part of what our yearly meeting has never done, these recognitions of ministry as ministers. Traveling minutes have always seemed to me to be a procedural but not meaningful thing. But I can see how Jerry's traveling minute really introduces him, and he doesn't have to say, I did this and I did that. You know, the traveling minute does that, which would be a convenience if you were traveling among people to have that. So there are a lot of Quaker methods that we know little about or know not much of. For example, I've come to believe that in a clearness committee about service, if one is going to undertake some service, in a clearness committee, first of all, a question might be, would this be recognized as a ministry of the individual? Then is, would this be recognized as a ministry of this meeting? And that means an ongoing support and connection. I like the name Anchor Committee that has recently come to my knowledge, but used to be, we'd call it clearness and support, or support and oversight, whatever. And the recognition of the ministry and of the minister can be very significant for the minister, at least, and typically can maybe be an introduction that, I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry, but that is very helpful. And this comes from the tradition of the time when people maybe didn't even have access to a postal service, you know, and people carried their traveling letter, which introduced them to the strangers, the strangers of friends 45 miles away that that never knew them or whatever. So that's where it comes from. And while it's can just be a procedural issue, it can be a deeply important spiritual way of connecting a minister with their meeting, or helping the minister's needs at home so that they're free to go. And John Woolman, you know, all of those ministers had some piece of that. My work being international, and at times, you know, I mean, pre pre-fax, much less email and so forth. It was an important thing to me. And some of us, like Liz, work in other groups that are not Quaker. And I don't know, are you out as a Quaker in your groups? Because in some cases, people really aren't, you know. And they have a term in these traditional terms called a public friend, right? Liz is nodding. She knows all this. She's from New York, maybe she knows all that. But it's, you know, it's really being out as a friend. And even if you're not representing a Quaker ministry or anything, it's, yeah. I was thinking also that one thing Liz mentioned was the struggle to see that of God in our adversaries when we're doing justice work, particularly. And that's the ideal thing for a support or a mutual support committee of people doing any kind of encounters outside of the Quaker world, or even in perhaps, where there's some conflict, to have someone to reflect upon it from a Quaker viewpoint. I don't know, what do you think about that idea?
Well, this is a challenging panel here. I think it would be useful, and in the kind of organizing I do, traditionally it's been about, you know, you're looking at power imbalances. And so that's a different way of looking at the world. And I still think there's I do think it would be interesting for me to have some people to talk about the spiritual part, because the power part is draining, right? Because we keep making steps forward and steps back, and we live in a part of the country that's a lot of steps back and not reflective of the people who actually live in our parts of the country. And it's draining. And sometimes I want to talk about it and sometimes I don't, just to be honest.
Jerry, do you have any reflections on what we've been talking about so far?
Yeah, I visited prisoners once a month for a dozen years with prisoner visitation and support. And I didn't need support from my meeting because the organization was set up so well with annual gatherings to be with people, and good support from the organization. So it used to be listed in my traveling ministry, my traveling minute, but I've taken it out because my hearing has gotten bad and I just couldn't hear the prisoners in the waiting in the visiting room because of the walls and stuff. It was just too noisy. But it depends on who you're working with. You know, does your organization give you spiritual support if it's outside the Quakers? There is a group of Quakers called Good News Associates that provides support if you're looking, if your organization doesn't do it. You can talk to them and see if you could become an associate. I keep shutting my my video off because I feel like God up here with me being so big.
This is a subject I feel very passionate about. Oh, thank you. Good idea. I was released by New York Yearly Meeting and New York Monthly Meeting at the age of 21, just out of college, to do draft and military counseling and to train draft counselors all over the yearly meeting area. That release, I can't tell you what it meant to that 20-year-old, but maybe I can tell you what it meant to that 20-year-old because I've worked for Quakers and done peace and justice work ever since. And that experience of being supported, and when I say released, they paid me a small stipend. They released me from having to find a job. They paid my expenses as I traveled around the yearly meeting. And mind you, we were into simple living at that point, and they were very simple. I always stayed with friends in various places. Some of the experiences of staying with friends can be very interesting. With what they think are accommodated, they are not motel accommodations, but I found that more comfortable because I was able to visit with families and people and really understand their condition while trying to do justice work, basically, peace and justice work. And it was a profound experience. I remember being, when the monthly meeting passed this to the yearly meeting to do it together. The monthly meeting had the money to do it. New York monthly meeting at that point was a very wealthy monthly meeting. So they had the money to do it. And the ministry led to more, we didn't call it ministry. We were really careful not to call it ministry. The releasing led to more than that. Because I would not pay my federal war taxes at that point. And that meant I would not allow them to withdraw those from my income. And so the monthly meeting, which was the fiscal unit, had to deal with that. And we actually lost a treasurer to the monthly meeting, but everybody was okay with that because they really felt that it was right for them not to withhold that money. And it was a big step in the monthly meeting and all the friends in the monthly meeting to agree to that. It took almost till the end of my release, which was only really a year, until they decided that they could do that. So it was a profound experience for a young friend to have that happen. And I've always wanted and had support communities, anchor committees, various other kinds of things as I've gone on and done my other work among friends.
Thank you. Do other people want to talk about their experiences? It occurs to me as I'm thinking through this now, that, you know, the shorthand for Quaker testimonies are the spices. And I doubt there's a person in this room that doesn't have a concern for one of those things that affects a good part of their life. And it strikes me that if you are working on any of those testimonies, which is not necessarily, you might not call it work for justice if you're working on integrity, say. But if you're working on any kind of witness that draws on the Quaker tradition of the spices, that the spices have come to be shorthand for, wouldn't you want to talk with other Quakers about that on a regular basis? Maybe not just, you know, give a message in meeting or occasional forum. Wouldn't you want to have a dialogue so that you could deepen your own understanding? Somebody might say, well, gee, is that really integrity, what you were doing? Someone challenged me on something like that. You know, and have that as part of our, not just community life, but as part of our worship life, and bringing our daily life and our worship into active interactions. Oh, I didn't do that. Active interactions in our everyday life, here or there, here or in the workplace and in the community and in the family and all of that. These are all ways to engage our being led by faith to work for justice in the end, to work for truth, to witness for the truth. Would that be something that most of us in this room would like to somehow see develop in our monthly meetings, and maybe find a way for the yearly meeting to support that if it was necessary? I'm just curious what people think about that, or if anyone else wants to tell a story. Jessica, will you?
Thank you. That sounds awesome. Some of you may know, I run a small theater and coffee shop in Austin. And believe it or not, there's some drama in theater sometimes. It frequently, I think of my role in that as to be the holder of the community. And when I first started being engaged in it, I really felt like the Quaker values supported me to come into the community and bring my values and our testimonies to the community that I was infiltrating, that I was becoming a part of. And frequently questions come up around community and integrity that I harken back on my Quaker values. But oh my gosh, if I could have people to actually discuss it with, I think it would make me much more clearly in alignment. One of the things I feel is that when we go out into the world and we bring our Quaker values, that's our witness. That's that's changing the world right there. And so I feel that I would be a much better minister, even though I'm not an actual minister. I would be a much better minister in that way had I people to talk with about how to stay in integrity while I support this other community, my theater community.
Yeah, I think this is a really important conversation. And my story is that when the Iraq War started, a peace group had just formed just a few months before that in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And I remember really starting to, and Richard and I both started volunteering with them right away. As soon as we moved into town, we were living out of town at the time, and we moved into town and started volunteering immediately. And that testimony of peace was just so powerful to us in the face of that war. And as we kept working and struggling to try to make some kind of headway against this juggernaut, it got so very clear that there was they were not going to listen to us. And it felt so much like there is a way to do peace. We're not in a position to do this now. This culture is just totally against this idea of peace. And what does that mean? And it was my Quaker meeting that really kind of kept that alive in my mind about how peace actually was a way of life that could be practical and productive, because that's what people would tell us all around. You can't, it's a war. You can't be against the war because otherwise you don't have any way to be safe. There's these strange ways of thinking about that I think that come out of war culture, and that belief in violence is powerful. Well, so then eventually I became director of that group and have run it now for a dozen years. And my real sense about the work of peace groups is that the protest model is only good for so long. It accomplishes some things, but we need a whole different set of infrastructures and assumptions to work from before it's actually going to be beneficial and actually bring about a culture of peace. And as we're working through this, it's really critical that we have people who are coming from this peace value that Quakers hold and have held all these many, many years. However, when it comes to asking for a clearness committee, which I agree would be a really valuable service for the meeting. I mean, our meeting is pretty small, you know, and so for me to tie up 3 or 4 people out of our meeting really meant that they were going to give up time from leadership of the meeting. So I never felt like I should do that. I did not feel I should do that. And I do feel like it would have been hugely beneficial if I had, but I just never could quite ask that of my meeting. And I really see how beneficial that can be where people have done that. And I really want to, ways to encourage that, you know, I think that's really, really valuable. I also wish my husband would talk about his prison ministry that he's been working on now for a number of years, but I'll let you decide that.
As she's going back there, I think one of the nicest models of what Gladys was saying she wish she had or wish she knew how to have might be a mutual support committee, a small group that meets together regularly, splits up the time, the person talks about what's in their heart. They pray together if praying is what they do, or they hold each other in the light together. Or there's also the light committees, the light groups that use the Rex Ambler experiment with the light type thing for people who maybe don't have a clear sense of what their ministry is developing into. That might also be a useful way to bring meeting to our work and our work to the meeting.
Alex McDonald, Liveoak Friends Meeting in Houston. I want to acknowledge how wonderful it was to have Jerry come and minister to Liveoak in Houston. I'm also curious, and it's also a delight to have him here virtually. And I'm wondering how this ministry practice can leverage off of the technology and the pattern that many of our meetings now are doing hybrid and using video conferencing as a way not only to expand the opportunity of ministry for people, lower the costs, and for us to more easily share some of these passions and support for our testimonies. What was going through my mind is, wow, it'd be great to have a first day school on how the testimonies are practiced in the theater. From Austin, I'd love that and have that as a first day school in Houston. And I'm just wondering, what ways would there be for us to communicate about all these kinds of opportunities? Because until I heard that, it never would have occurred to me. And I'm sure that each of our meetings has those. So even without going through all the formal process, it would be lovely to know about opportunities to share how we reach out to our communities and practice our testimonies. Thank you.
Right now, he's got the mic, I think.
Oh, I can't
okay.
talk here?
Okay.
Okay. I thought I might say a little about my work with FCNL, Friends Committee on National Legislation. When I started working as part of the advocacy team in Austin, I had this view of congressmen that was a dichotomy. On the one hand, I saw them as these august, sober people considering legislation rationally and with due analysis. And on the other hand, I saw them as kind of a monster. They did these horrible things. But the first thing I learned in working with FCNL is that Congress people are actually telemarketers. They spend 8 hours a day raising funds. And they don't do it in their sumptuous congressional offices. By law, they're required to do it in a separate building. So they're actually in little cubicles about this wide, just enough room for their elbows, talking on the phone 8 hours a day. The other thing I learned by interacting with the staffers is they're just folks. They're just folks very much like you and I. They have the same problems that we do. They have children. They have spouses. They have and they have to drive to work every day or ride the subway. And they also are very cordial for the most part. Most of the congressional staffers are very personable people, and it's very easy to get to like them, regardless of what the voting position of their the representative they work for. They can be very engaging. My congressman is a used car salesman, and yet I developed a very close relationship with his chief of staff, and I would say he's not quite a friend, but he's someone that I have a place in my heart for. Now, some of the representatives, staffers are not so cordial. Representative Carter's staffer, it's very easy to see he's an ideologue, and he doesn't really embrace reality other than from the point of view of his ideology. In interacting with the staffers at Ted Cruz's office, their reactions are quite untoward for the most part. They don't behave like people who are in touch with all their faculties, with one exception. One exception in Ted Cruz's office, and I'll give you one example. When we at one point we met the staffer in the federal building in Austin, and we were required to meet right next to the entrance, and so there were people coming and going. It was very noisy, and the X-ray machine was working, and the conveyor belt was moving into the so it was hard to hear the representative staffer. And so she said something to me, and I leaned a little closer and said, what was that? And she said, oh, don't get too close. I just got married this weekend, and my husband would be jealous. However, at first I thought I was there to lobby, only to lobby for whatever ask we were presenting. But when the SCNL was doing the audit the Pentagon ask, in 1983, there was a law passed that all agencies have to be audited. And all of them were audited except for the Pentagon. And so FCNL was asking us to ask our representatives to audit the Pentagon. And I went to my representative, Roger Williams' office in downtown Austin. And I talked to this young man who was just fresh out of college, and his eyes were kind of glazed over. So I realized, well, I'm not making any headway here, but I found that there was a military liaison in Cleburne. And since it was about the Pentagon, I thought that it would be appropriate to approach this person. So myself and another person drove all the way to Cleburne to meet with this fellow, and he had not heard of the audit the Pentagon bill. And so he had his assistant go off and research it, and they came back and told him what it was about. And the guy said, well, this bill only has 60 sponsors. You're never going to get a bill passed unless you have 100 sponsors. And I said, well, that's what I'm here for. I want Roger Williams to be 61st. So anyway, 2 weeks later, I called back the office, and the military liaison said, Oh, yeah, we talked about this in our staff meeting, and Roger Williams decided that he's going to vote for this bill. And this is what SCNL does. It doesn't confront the military head on. It kind of goes around to the side for little crevice issues where there might be an intersection between progressives and conservatives, such as the audit the Pentagon bill, because Roger Williams is very interested in saving money. You know, he hates the government spending money that will go to waste. And so that's why he voted for that bill. Anyway, those are some of my experiences in activism.
Lon, and then Bill.
I just want to say how important the Quaker meeting has been to me in my activism. Some of you know I'm kind of a lifer activist, and I do both issue and electoral politics. But I first started attending Fort Worth meeting at the beginning threats of the first Iraq War because I needed a community. I knew I was a faith-based pacifist without a faith organization. And I mean, more or less Quakers are organized, if not more so than any place else. But I want to do a shout out with deliberate speed to both Claudia and Liz, because they mentored me and said, you need to be a part of SCNL. That is your heart, that's where you are. And so even though, like Liz, I've never really come to my meeting to ask them for anything. I make announcements and hope somebody will decide to be involved, or I'm always supportive of any initiative that anybody in our meeting suggests. It's really, frankly, that cliche about half of life is just being there and showing up. My meeting is there. They don't always have to say anything to me, but between my meeting and I tell FCNL people, I receive more than I give just by participating with FCNL because it keeps my heart strong. And I've laid my eyes on somebody here today that I'm going to do the same thing for that person that Liz and Claudia did for me. So watch out, I'm coming.
Bill, did you still want to speak?
On the other side of things, rather than support, how would you react for active opposition or fairly somewhat passive, but opposition, or even worse, total indifference within the meeting rather than support?
I don't know, Liz, do you want to talk on that first? Do you have any response? And Jerry, you're just gonna have to speak up because I don't have a way to see what you're doing.
It's actually not my story, but when I first came to the Dallas meeting, Kirsten Dean, who many of you probably know from yearly meeting and Friends Meeting of Austin, had a leading to go to Central America. I'm actually not sure which country, so I apologize to her, to be a witness, to essentially be a gringa following activists around with a camera because there were no cell phones and no video at that point. And she was a member of the Dallas meeting. She came to our meeting and many of your meetings to ask for $100 to support this work. And our meeting had a whole thing about we don't have the money. And I finally had to get up and say, I work for a really broke organization and this is not it. So I think there's a little bit of conservatism around funding and what it means. And I think Paula spoke to this yesterday about, how do we spend our money? And I think that's one of the places I've seen some sort of holding back, is that I've always come to meeting with the sense that if we need the money, if we have a spiritual purpose for money, it will show up. That's my experience in Quakerism, but it's not always the way I think we behave.
Jerry, do you have anything to chime in here? His camera's off, so we can't see anyway. Okay. Jerry,
There.
did you?
Yeah, I just came on. Okay. Yeah, it seems to me that that is the biggest problem with Quakers being apathetic or being against your ministry is the financial thing, because we have this, this thing about paid preachers from George Fox's day. And, when you put out a donation box at a gathering, you get some money, but not near enough to cover your expenses. So that's something that meetings really need to come to terms with.
Fundraising is one of the areas, if you need the financial support, where it is a challenge. And I'm sure all my friends that work with Quaker organizations or other NGOs know that constant fundraising is a constant burden, but it's needed. You got to have that flow of resources to keep whatever it is moving, whether it's FCNL or whether it's AVP classes in El Salvador, or whether it's home gardens in Indonesia or whatever. There's a need. One thing I learned early along, and for which I'm so grateful, is to learn how to say, I invite you to share. I invite you to share in this. And there are lots of ways. And one way that you can be a part of this work is a financial donation. But there are a lot of other ways, and they're not in order. They're all ways of support. I do want to say, remember that song, Home on the Range? Can we have our meetings be where there's never heard a discouraging word about other people's leadings and activism and witness? Can we call out that of God in them rather than noticing where we don't think God's showing up? It's not that easy, really. But I had an experience. It was hard for me to fit into the San Antonio meeting when I moved there. And well into my time with San Antonio, I was still not able to pull together a support committee because I didn't really know what I was doing about asking for support. Just like today, I don't know whether I should ask somebody to do this or that for me since I fell down, but I'm getting better at it. So watch out. But there was one really terrible moment when I asked a beloved friend, who I think was on ministry at that time, maybe not, if I could have a support committee. And my friend said, well, we all do good work. Why should we support you? And I realized the answer afterward was because I asked. But I wasn't able to talk to anybody about that because that was an extraordinarily discouraging word. So let's be home on the range at the meetings, okay? Where we may personally care less about whatever it is, somebody who wants to do home births in a bathtub, or whatever. Maybe that's not our thing. And maybe we even think it's a bad idea. And I'm sorry for that example if I'm offending anybody that does that, but that's just what popped in my mind. But there's 1,000,001 of those kinds of things. I think I'm coming to think that the most important thing is, first of all, individually to be out, to identify, seriously identify as a Quaker and be out. And it doesn't have to be in your face. You know, we see a lot of our friends who, to be themselves, have to be out about one thing or another. Gender issues are very familiar, but other things too. We see that. And they just incorporate into their life. Maybe they have a little sticker that they wear, or maybe everyone kind of knows. But you never think of that person without knowing that they are, whatever their identity is. There's a lot about identity politics dividing us, but if we don't know each other, we're already divided. Can we be out as Quakers, and can we support each other in the ways that we do things, you know, outside of the meeting? When we're in meeting, we're in a pool of love, ideally. How do we help people have that when they leave and go their separate ways, but not still be separated? I don't know. There's probably a lot of other good queries that would come out of this thought, but I haven't thought them that far ahead. Let me ask this Liz, and then we'll have that Liz. Would someone take the...
Can you raise your hand again? Terry?
Yeah, Terry, I'm sorry, Terry, you look like Liz for a moment.
I look like Liz with the mask on.
Sorry about that.
Bank robber with a mask.
I'm confused.
I don't have glasses. Well, for me, the Friends meeting of Austin and Quaker organizations that I've been connected to because of the Friends meeting of Austin have been what's led me. It led me away from what I intended to do. First of all, I had been studying music at the University of Texas, and then the next thing that seemed to happen, we were declared a sanctuary. We declared ourselves, rather, and I was kind of pulled into it. And I've been working with immigrants ever since, including my husband. I've been working hard on him all the time. But it never seems, I've never asked for a clearness committee of any kind for the work I've done. It just seemed like the meeting itself pushed me in that direction. The expression "way will open" seemed to resonate so many times with different steps along the way. And I guess I feel also that if I would like to have a clearness committee, I know I feel confident that I could have one. And when I think back about beginning to attend the Friends meeting, it always seemed like definitely way open. It was when the first Quaker I ever met, I was in college in Virginia, and I said I didn't know much about them, and she described the meeting for worship, which frankly I thought sounded pretty awful. And I had at the same time being pulled away from the Catholic Church, not because of anything that a sane and sensible person probably would be pulled away from, but just that the music had gotten really bad after Vatican II. And I cared a lot about music and expected it to be my life. And the Quaker meeting had other ideas for me that no one ever expressed, and it was just the community and the activities of the community. Even all the members and attenders who do prison visitation or any number of other things. Friends meeting everywhere, I think, seems to care about others and want to make the world a better place, and pushes us to participate in that work in one way or another.
I'd like to note we are drawing near to the end of time. So can Louise speak because she hasn't spoken yet? And then maybe you can pull it together at the end, Liz. Whew, Liz, for real.
Okay. Thank you. I have a rather odd history. My mother was a woman who was very attracted to the Quakers, but because of some things that she considered shameful in her life, she never went to meeting, never made any efforts. So I was brought up with the notion that God was inside us. And I was brought up with the notion of integrity, which was taught to me as a child. Like, if you tell somebody you're going to do something with them, you don't cancel that and do something with somebody else. So anyway, she died when I was 16, and I knew that her behavior was related to the Quakers. And I started attending the Plainfield, New Jersey meeting, which is a very old meeting. And I never really was able to reach out to them. Most of them were a good deal older than I was. I was 17, you know, but I went every Sunday. And then when I went to Douglas College, they had a friend's house. So I attended meeting there and whatever recreations. At the same time, the Vietnam War was, of course, beginning to really mount up. And I became very involved in peace actions, not with the Quakers, but it wasn't the Quaker meeting that supported me. It was the Quaker values that supported me. And then I went through another period of time when I was not able to attend meeting because of troubles in my first marriage. And that was quite lengthy, and I didn't really attend a Quaker meeting again until my second husband and I moved down here 13 years ago. So again, I used to run into Alex at protests, and he's always been supportive. But it was not that I expected or ever got support from people in the meeting so much as I got it out of the values of the meeting, especially integrity and equality.
Excuse me, friends, for speaking so much, but I had to bring into our midst Terry spoke a little bit about Austin Meeting, but Austin Meeting has supported two friends in Bogota, Colombia. And I would say that what we've been doing with Carol Byler and Paul Stuckey, I was just trying to give their last names. For how many years now, Terry? I mean, this. Yeah, so 30 years, okay. So for 30 years, they have been doing peace and justice and health work, which I consider justice work, in Bogota with displaced people. And our meeting does two things for them. One, we provide a support committee for them that meets on a fairly regular basis and tries to do some work in terms of bringing them, when they can come back to the country, helping them to share their message of what's going on there, particularly the peace and justice and displaced young people work that they're doing. And then the other thing that we do is we kind of act as a pass-through. We contribute quite a bit of money to them, but there are Mennonite families that they know that contribute fairly heavily to them. And that is through our meeting. And so we've been able to support them through until retirement. I think they're pretty much retired, well, somewhat retired now, but we pay, we've made it possible for them to earn enough in this country to get Social Security from this country because they're both American citizens. So and we continue to support them. I think we give them some, and with Zoom, they've been able to join us for meeting more often, which is great, which is just wonderful. So I think Paul spoke here at yearly meeting about 10 years ago, probably now. And he is a real example to me of somebody, he and Carol, who asked and got that released from us as Quakers at our meeting. So I think so many of the things that have been said here are, I'm going to give it back to Val, because I think you should really sum it up. But I think we've come up with some very good ways in which both in a traditional Quaker way and also just as people being together in faith can help each other to do our ministry. Hard for me to call it ministry. Oh, do you want? Okay. I was just going to hand it to you. Okay, they're not retired from the ministry we support at all.
Well, friends, thank you. Let's remember that story, the silent meeting where the visitor at the end and people are shaking hands says, "When does the service start?" And they say, "Now." And also remember, we're all ministers. We are all ministers. We don't have ministers that are the only one. We don't have laity. We only have clergy. We're all ministers. Let's look at our ministry and our lives. Take meeting with us and bring it back. Thank you. Thank you, Jerry, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Bye, Jerry. I'll see you later, Jerry.
Okay, see you later.